Ayo Yokoso, which means welcome if you're new. I'm glad you're here because I want to talk to you today about the Onexplayer X1 Air, which would be right here if I hadn't already returned it. That's right, this device was loaned to me by Onexplayer, and I've since returned it as of the making of this video. But I love this device so much that I've decided to put my own money behind it, which means that you will find plenty more videos on this device later down the road. So what's the big difference between this device, the Onexplayer X1 Air, and the previous Onexplayer X1 Pro? The big difference mainly is the APU or the CPU that's inside of the device. This one has the Intel 258V, which is the same chip that's inside of the MSI Claw AI8 Plus. That's different from the HX370, the Ryzen APU that was in the X1 Pro. There are some other little differences as well, which I'll talk about later. Before that though, I need to tell you about this function, which nobody seems to be talking about and is an absolute game changer for Windows devices. This fridge function that is within the Onex console software allows you to freeze a game and then you can return to it later. Now there is a hibernation mode that they've advertised on their YouTube channel before, and I've tested this. It works pretty well, despite the fact that Windows itself is not good at sleeping or hibernating, which is why I also think SteamOS or Bazzite is much better in terms of being on the go. That said, I did try out the freeze function for probably an unintended use case. I played Cyberpunk 2077 and Final Fantasy Tactics simultaneously in a sense. I booted them both up, I froze both the apps, and then I switched between the two of them. It actually worked for the most part, until I tried to hibernate the device and then everything went sideways. But as I said, Windows doesn't do well with sleep and hibernation, so you know, that's just typical Windows shenanigans. Ergonomics wise, it's very similar because the controllers detach from the body. They feel very lightweight, which I know is a point of contention. I personally like them. I felt that they were reasonably comfortable. One thing that differs this time from the previous review was that I got to test the controller bridge or controller connector, which I was very critical about on the Onexplayer 2. This thing has been a little bit more refined. It's a little bit smaller. It seems like it's got soft edges and things like that. It works and it functions decently. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any added functionality, like there's no macro buttons or anything like that, and you still have to connect it using the USB dongle, which this time is magnetic and doesn't just get flung out like Ant-Man from some kind of weird shotgun. This thing, though, is unfortunate because it would be really good if it just worked with Bluetooth or some other devices. In this case, it will work with other devices, but you're dependent on that Bluetooth receiver that it comes with. So in the future, I would like to see some tiny little batteries even inside each of the controllers themselves so that we can have functionality outside of using that controller bridge. Besides that, I think it works decently. I'm always going to have it connected to the device itself, so it doesn't really bother me, but hey, I understand that it might bother you. That said, another thing that might bother you is just how clicky the buttons are. I'll try to show that on screen. They are going to bother you, I think, if you want a really quiet environment and maybe you're playing in bed next to someone. In that case, maybe you'll have to use a separate controller. And speaking of ergonomics, I mean, not really, but something else I didn't get to test in the X1 Pro review was the keyboard itself. And this thing is miles ahead of the Onexplayer 2 keyboard as well. It's finally backlit and it can wake the device from sleep. I know that might sound like nitpicking, but boy, was that a serious issue for me personally. It can't really be a productivity device if you can't use it that way, at least in my opinion. So now it actually works in a way where it is a mini laptop or a slightly smaller laptop. The other thing I will say about the keyboard itself is finally, thank you, Onexplayer. You have made it so that it's got a traditional layout now, and you can use the apostrophe and semicolon as well as the quotation marks without using function and O or function and P. I know that sounds like nitpicking as well, but believe me, as an English typer, that's a huge pain in the ass to have to do that, especially when it's in some kind of half-width keyboard size. I consider myself a kind of casual keyboard snob, and that thing was terrible for that. You can see what I throw up on screen, my typical typing test, which I do the 3-minute typing test, and this thing was right there with what my average is using a full-size mechanical keyboard. So when I do the test, I typically get a range of 85 to 88 words per minute. So this was right up in that range, which is perfect. The keyboard itself is not perfect though, because the trackpad is kind of hit or miss, but hey, not every trackpad is great. What about performance though? In terms of performance, I think that this thing will surprise you. People have been sleeping on Intel for a long time. You can take a look around YouTube and you'll find plenty of videos on the MSI Claw AI8 Plus, which this thing shares a chip with. This thing has the Intel 258V, which trades blows with the HX370 from AMD. And in some cases, it might be even more efficient at the lower wattages. When I tested it at 4 watts and 5 watts, it was able to play games like Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. That's surprising considering Intel has had the reputation of being a real juice or energy guzzler. So color me surprised there too. We know that Ryzen, particularly the HX370, doesn't do that well once it goes under 10 watts. So this is great news. And for performance, you're going to find that this thing really does deliver. And that is a shocker to anyone who has been sleeping on Intel. But you wouldn't be sleeping on Intel, of course, if you joined me on the Handhelds United podcast, which is called the Speedcast, and I host that with a number of my expert panelists who know way more about handhelds than even I do. So make sure you check us out on the Handhelds United Discord channel or on the Handhelds United YouTube channel. And speaking of that point, this is the difference between this device and the X1 Pro. This thing has not just the different APU, a slightly larger battery in 72 watt hours versus 65 watt hours, as well as the big contentious change, which I'm going to talk about now. The possible trade-off here is that it no longer has Oculink, which I know I've been vocal in the past about preferring USB 4, which this device still has. Oculink users though, I totally get it. You bought the whole eGPU, you want to use the whole eGPU. So the Oculink port there is going to give you the most performance in that case. And it's not on this device, unfortunately. They've traded the Oculink port for a mini-SSD port. This new ByWin mini-SSD, I believe, which unfortunately I wasn't able to test because I wasn't loaned one of the mini-SSDs. I think there's a supply shortage or something like that. Anyway, looking at the slot, the mini-SSDs are about 50% larger than a microSD, so they're tiny. So as long as they can hit anywhere near that advertised 3,500 megabits per second, that's incredible. That should mean that you're able to boot a different OS like Bazzite or SteamOS or something off of that other mini SSD rather than just relying on the internal SSD. So if you're looking at that comparison, with a mini SSD being up to 2 terabytes, if you're willing to switch the internal SSD to a 4 terabyte, I don't know if it supports a dual-sided 8 terabyte, and then you get a mini SSD that's 2 terabytes, and then you also get a micro SD card that's 2 terabytes, you're looking at 8 terabytes of storage in one device there. And again, if you're able to fit in a double-sided 8 terabyte storage device, that you're talking what is the math there? I don't know, I'm ruining the stereotype, but that's like 12 terabytes in one device. That's insane. That's probably larger than my gigantic backlog of over 200 games on Steam. Anyway, this is incredible. I think that this device here, if you're looking for that productivity first and then handheld second, is going to be that do-it-all device. So what other difference are there between the X1 Air and the X1 Pro? Well, now they don't have that magnetic kickstand on the back. It's a built-in metal kickstand, which is a really nice improvement. I also mentioned before that the vent was covered in the X1 Pro. The vent or the grill or whatever now is exposed. So there's two intakes or big holes there on the back for you to enjoy some better cooling there. The metal kickstand, I will say, can scratch a table if you're concerned about that, but it's nice and rigid, which means that if you're deciding to use this device as a tablet, that can kind of work as a handle too. Don't swing it around. That's not recommended, obviously. You can swing your other stuff around. I mean, no, not that. So what's the best thing about this device? Truly, I personally think there are plenty of things good about this device. Comparing this to the Legion Go and the Legion Go 2, which I have called that form factor the do-it-all type of device, I think that this can fall right in line, except that the situations or their designations are reversed, in that the Legion Go and the Legion Go 2, they would be handheld first devices, tablets, and then secondary, they would be productivity devices. This is the reverse. This is a productivity or a laptop device first, and then a handheld second. So if this is what you're looking for, bigger screen gaming at the cost of portability, this might be the way to go. For me personally, I do think the sweet spot for a handheld is an 8-inch display to an 8.8-inch display. But once again, if you're not looking for handheld first type of device and you're willing to sacrifice that portability, the X1 series, particularly the X1 Pro and the X1 Air here, might be the way to go for you. For me, I found that this is my preference currently because I'm taking my handheld around less, and I will, this is probably going to get me in trouble. I take around my Switch when I go out with the family or I have to commute. But as I said in the intro, I stand by this device so much so that I put my own money behind it, not like your average shill. So make sure you stick around for some long-term review and some additional content on this particular handheld, because it might surprise you with tricks it's got up its sleeve, like the fridge mode that I was mentioning earlier. Anyway, if you fancy yourself a big handheld device, which is technically a laptop or tablet first, the X1 series, either the X1 Pro or the X1 Air, might fit your needs. Once again, I think the biggest difference between these two devices is the Oculink port and the mini-SSD support. If you don't care about either of those things, it's probably more of a situation of whether that 10% of battery life matters to you and whether or not you think that having a Ryzen device or an Intel device is going to matter down the line. This device also gets me very excited for a potential AI Max 395 or Strix Halo refresh of this device. Can we call it an X1 Max like we've been bullying them to do on the Discord? Yeah, come and join me on Discord. You can do all the tinfoil hatting with me and my friends from Handhelds United. And until then, make sure to get yourself some
치즈김밥? 그리웠던 적이 있었어 없었어?
뭐라고?